views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Hello and welcome to the American Veteran. I'm Dale Parrish, your host. Our co-host today is Lynn Shady. Thank you for coming in today, Lynn.
Okay, that's okay.
Our guest today is Jim Alspaugh, Vietnam veteran. I happened to run into him. There was an article in the Busco paper about his revisit to Vietnam, so I gave him a call, and he was very glad to come on the show with us. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Dale. Start from the beginning. I served in Vietnam in 1967. I was drafted into the Army in August 1966. And I was married, and because we had no children, I was drafted and spent my basic in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then I was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry training, and then I was sent to Oakland Army Terminal in California. I was shipped out for Vietnam. I spent January to December in Vietnam, and I was sent to the 9th Infantry Division, which was located down in the Mekong Delta. It was a base camp called Bearcat, and it was about a mile square base camp, and there was approximately 10,000 troops there at the base camp at that time. In November of 2011, last year, my wife and I returned to Vietnam on a cruise, and we had the opportunity to go back to Saigon, where I had a chance to visit during my time when I was over there in the service. There's an article in the Churubusco paper that showed me in Vietnam, and I wrote up the article while I was on the ship. I did bring along some items that I brought back with me. One is a captured weapon. It's a 1940 German Mauser, and it was found close to our base camp in a weapons cache. This was about 13 miles east of our base camp, and it was found in October 1967.
That's what the Viet Cong used, no?
The Viet Cong used just about any weapon they could get their hands on. This was World War II German. They had some U.S. military weapons, some M1s, a few M Grands. They had Chinese AK-47s, and early in the war they even used bows and arrows up in the highlands. These were very, very basic weapons at the start of the war. I have some photographs I can show now. These are combat photographs that were taken, and I received these from a combat photographer in Vietnam. This was part of the Mobile Riverine Force. These are Navy ships that were staffed by the Navy, and then the Army was on the ships, and they went up into the canals and to hunt out the enemy. Here's another photo of the Mobile Riverine Force. Here are some of the weapons that were found in that weapons cache. There was about 1,150 weapons that were found, which this weapon is part of the cache that was found.
How did you bring that weapon home? We wasn't allowed to bring anything home.
It was quite an extensive process. You had to acquire the weapon, and then you had to take it to a place in Saigon that approved you to bring it back. And you couldn't bring a military weapon back that was fully automatic. And it couldn't be a U.S. military weapon. In other words, I couldn't have brought back a .45 pistol or an M16 or an M1 Garand. It had to be a bona fide war souvenir. It had to be checked out, and then they gave you a certificate. And when I got on the plane in Saigon with that, I had to show that certificate before I got on the plane, and they had to check the numbers to make sure that I was authorized to bring this weapon back. And I had to hand carry it through all the airports as I came back along with that certificate.
Wouldn't get away with that today, would you?
No, you wouldn't even get close to the airport with a weapon today. But it was very common. A lot of the guys brought them back. Several of the guys sold them or lost them or whatever. A lot of people may say they have the weapon, but if they don't have the certificate to go along with it, it's really a moot point. No, I do have the certificate that says that I was authorized to bring this back.
Yeah, I had a Chinese rifle, and it was, might as well just pass it on to somebody else when you left.
Yeah,
is that operable?
It is operable. It isn't today because I removed the bolt. It's an 8mm. It's a 1940 German Mauser, and I've fired it several times, and it does have a pretty good kick to it, and you can still buy ammunition for it. It's a very common rifle. I'll show some other photographs. This was taken down inside the tunnel complex where these weapons were found. Here's some howitzers. You can see the guys holding their Zippo lighters, and this was down inside the tunnel complex, which was very low and very dark, and of course it was very dirty down in there.
Was you down in any of those?
No, I was not down in the tunnel complex. When we returned to Vietnam in November of last year, we had the opportunity to go down back into those tunnels, what they call the Cu Chi Tunnel Complex. We did not go because we were only in Saigon one day, and I elected to go to Saigon itself, which is where I was when I was in the military there. So my wife and I went back to Saigon, spent the day in Saigon. I would like to have went to the tunnel complex. I don't know if I would have went down inside of it or not because you know, it's a little bit close down in there. Here's some of the plows that they brought in to clear the jungle. After they found this complex, they cleared the jungle out, and then they started bringing all these weapons up out of the jungle. Here's some more weapons that were found. These were anti-aircraft guns that were found down in there.
Well, being down in that damp air all the time, you wouldn't think you'd think they'd rust up to.
Well, a lot of them were packed in cosmoline.
Was they?
Yeah, and wrapped in like a cosmoline type paper. Here's some 105 shells that were down inside the complex. And here's some of the weapons that were found, and here's a helicopter that they brought in to view some of these. They had quite a few dignitaries that came in and looked at these weapons. This is General Westmoreland. This is a colonel from our brigade, and I believe this is the general from North Vietnam, the 4-star. I'm not sure what his name was now. Here's another interesting photo. This is my plane ticket home.
Best ticket you ever got, I bet.
Yeah, that was the only ticket I ever got that I liked. It was 30 December 1967. Bob Hope came to the base camp where I was at, and I got to meet him. And 5 days later, I came back. This is the unit that I served in, 9th Infantry Division in Vietnam. And this is a book that you could purchase over there. And this was a patch that we wore while I was in the service over there. You wear the left patch on your left shoulder when you're in a combat zone, and when you return, you put that patch on your right shoulder.
Huh.
What was the reason for that?
To show that you were with that unit in a combat zone.
Oh, okay.
So if you see a soldier and he has a patch on his right shoulder, it means that he was in a combat zone with that unit.
Oh, okay.
Another interesting thing, I'll kind of put this up here. My brother-in-law was in Korea and Japan right after the right after the Korean War, and he had a son that was about 4 years old. I sent him this jacket back from 1967 when I was in Vietnam, and I put the patch on it and my unit patch, and I put my insignia, and I put his name on it in U.S. Army. When my brother-in-law was in Korea in 52 or 53, he sent me a jacket similar to this, which I wore until I finally outgrew it. And then I sent his son this jacket in 1967, and several years ago I acquired the jacket back.
Oh,
And I think I probably paid $2 or $3 for it, and then I had the patches on, and sent that back. Sent that back to him, and he was very proud of it, and he wore it for several years until he finally outgrew it, and then I acquired the weapon back.
Now, when you got out of basic, did they send you right to Vietnam, or?
No, I was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry training, and I was in Fort Polk for approximately 2 months, and then I came back for a leave during Christmas, and we spent about 2 weeks at home, and then I shipped out to Oakland Army Terminal, and I was there just a few days, and then I flew into Benoit Air Base in Vietnam, and then I was sent to the 90th Replacement Battalion in Long Binh, and from there I was struck down to our base camp, which is down in the Mekong Delta, and I spent most of my time down in the base camp in the Mekong Delta. Went to Saigon a few times to pick up supplies and so forth, but most of the time was spent in the base camp pulling guard duty and doing the job that I was sent down there to do.
What kind of animals and insects did you run into over there?
They had mosquitoes that were big enough you could fry them and eat them, and they had big cockroaches. There was a few elephants there at the time, but most of those had been killed by the jets, because the Vietnamese, or the North Vietnamese were using them as pack animals. So whenever the pilots would see them, they would take care of them.
Probably
they would shoot them.
The only animal that could get through some of that.
Some of the brush, where I was down in Mekong Delta, it was basically rice paddies down there.
Was it?
Yeah, there wasn't too much ground that was dry outside of during the dry season. They had a small deer that you would see once in a while, and they had snakes. There was a snake they called a two-step viper, a bamboo viper.
I've heard of those.
If it bit you, you took 2 steps, and that was the end of it. But there wasn't that many small animals because of the war. They cleared a lot of jungle, and they removed a lot of the areas that the animals could hide in. So you didn't see just too many animals.
Yeah. What was you thinking when you first got to Vietnam?
Well, I was pretty scared.
Yes.
It was about 2 in the morning, and it was raining, and we got off the plane. They told us to grab a duffel bag and get off the plane, and then they put us on guard duty right away.
Yeah.
So we had to be out on guard duty, and of course the 105s were going off and the trip flares were going off, and I didn't know until the next morning that it was the battles that were going on were quite a ways away from us, but we still had to pull guard duty for the base camp. I was kind of green. I was a private and just been in the military about 6 or 7 months. And
put you on guard duty and they don't tell you a thing.
No, here's a rifle. There's a
go
guard post, and
I know exactly what you're saying.
if you see something that moves, shoot it. So that was about it. Yeah, it was probably the most impressive year in my life. The time I spent
now
there.
those trip wires, That was when the enemy crossed those that set the trips off.
We had what they call claymore mines.
Yeah.
And when we pulled guard duty, in the morning when the sun come up, we would have to go out and walk the area that we were protecting, and to make sure that those claymore mines were still out there. And what the enemy would do, they would take the claymore mine and they would pick it up and turn it around. Now the claymore mine is about so big, and it has BBs in it with C4 explosive, and then you run a tripwire back to your bunker. And if you see or hear something, you hit this lever and it goes off, and then of course it kills whatever out in front of it. What the enemy was doing, they would pick them up and turn them around, face them towards you. And then they would make a bunch of noise, and then you would hit the generator, and then the blast would come back to you. So we got kind of smart real early. We would dig a hole, put a hand grenade underneath that, pull the pin, set the claymore mine down on top of it.
Yeah.
So if the enemy did come around and pick the claymore up, the hand grenade went off along with the claymore mine.
That was in
And there wasn't too much left of them. We got in a hurry. And then they sprayed Agent Orange while I was over there. And I'm a victim of Agent Orange. I had cancer due to the Agent Orange, and it's currently in remission.
Great.
But that was sprayed just about every day. You could see the helicopters in the daytime. They would spray it, and it would completely turn all foliage just brown. Nothing would grow, and no animals would go out there because of the Agent Orange. And quite often the barrels would be leaking on guard duty at night. You could smell the stuff. It came in 50-gallon barrels.
Yeah.
And if the barrel would rust or if it got punctured somehow, the concentrate would leak out. And I had a good friend that sprayed it. He was on a helicopter that sprayed it, and he had some serious neurological problems, and he had a child that was in the late 60s, early 70s, that was probably, child had some problems, and it was probably due to the spraying of the Agent Orange.
Yes. We had a guest on that got into Agent Orange, and
yeah, it's
terrible.
It's some nasty stuff. You didn't think about it at the time, it was there, and it was just something they sprayed to kill the vegetation so the enemy wouldn't.
Did you have any trouble getting a claim to take care of your Agent Orange?
No, I went through the Vietnam Veterans of America, and after I was diagnosed with cancer, I went through the Vietnam Veterans of America, and it took about 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
But I did end up with a disability through the VA for that, which I'll get for life.
Yeah.
And I do go to the VA. They treat me real well, whenever I have any problems.
Yeah.
I go to the
do.
VA, and
That's great.
they treat me real well there, and so forth. And I'm real happy with the way that I've been treated at the VA.
Yeah. What weapons did you carry when you was there?
I carried basically an M16 rifle. That's what we used on guard duty, but I fired all the weapons during basic. I fired we trained with the M16 and the M14 rifle, and I fired the 45, and I fired the mortar, and the bazooka. I fired that, and the 50 caliber. I was originally what they call light weapons infantry, and when I got to Vietnam, I got a different MOS, so they removed the light weapons infantry, and then I was considered a heavy truck driver. I wanted to get rid of that infantry MOS right off the bat. That's kind of a millstone around your neck. But those are the weapons basically that I used over there, was just infantry weapons, and we carried them on guard duty, and along with our ammunition and our flak jacket and so forth.
Well, did you get out to any of the villages?
I did get out of the villages. We had a division chaplain that aided our mess hall, and him and I were the same religion, and he would take a helicopter and he would fly out to the different fire bases and the different villages, and he would say mass for the soldiers. And he knew I was Catholic, and he said, "You want to ride along with me and serve mass?" Because I served mass when I was in grade school. I said, "Sure." So I'd grab my skid lid, my steel pot, my rifle, and so many rounds of ammunition, and I would fly out with him on Sundays. and we would fly into these little base camps and so forth, and the guys would gather around, and they'd set up an altar on C rations, and he would tell the helicopter driver, he says, leave the chopper running. So, and then I would serve mass for him, and then he would fly around to different base camps on the Sunday, and where they didn't have a person minister to him. And so I did that a few times with him, and then I got to take a lot of photographs while I was there. And I had some time to myself, not much time to gather up some of the things. A lot of the guys that were there were 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. I was in my early 20s, and I was married, and I had worked in a factory for approximately 4 years for being drafted, so I was not just, like most of them, just a young kid right out of high school. I had a little maturity, at least I thought I did at the time, but and I had some chance to document the war and pick up some of the photographs and some of these items, to where a lot of the guys were, especially the guys out in the field, they didn't have that opportunity. They basically lived, from day to day in the foxhole or in the rice paddies, and didn't have much of a life.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, being married and being away from home like that's pretty tough.
Yeah, my wife and I had been married about 1.5 years before I was drafted, and I did get an R&R in Hawaii, and so I flew to Hawaii on an R&R about halfway through the tour over there, and I met my wife in Hawaii, and we spent a week there, and her folks came with her, so they got to spend a week in Hawaii, and so I did get to see Hawaii when I was there, and of course we did write letters almost every day, and I was allowed phone calls. You could phone call. Because of the time difference, I usually had to get up about 2 o'clock in the morning and go to this certain Mars radio network tent that was set up that you could call home. And I didn't call home too often. I just called to tell her any important news and when I was coming home and when we were going to Hawaii and anything like that. And the mail was good. We got mail every day, and we were allowed to write every day. And you could also, instead of putting a stamp where the stamp went, all you wrote was free. And then put it in the mailbox. And then just drop it in the mail.
Now that you mentioned, I remember that.
Yeah, you remember the free? Yeah. We had a mess sergeant there that worked in the mess hall, and he just loved to get mail. I mean, every day he was looking for a letter. Well, they would send one person over at the end of the evening for mail call, and they would bring the mail back. Well, Sergeant Sullivan always wanted a letter, and if you didn't give him a letter, he got kind of mad at you. And he was mad for a couple days till he got a letter. So what we started doing, if Sergeant Sullivan got 2 letters in one day, we would hide the other letter and wait until a day came to where he wouldn't get a letter, and then we would give him that letter. So it kind of made him kind of happy. So
settled him down.
Well, yeah, we didn't want him on our case all the time. So we started holding back some of his letters until the day that he didn't get a letter, and then we give him that letter.
I remember being in Korea. It took about 7 days for me to get a letter from home over to Korea, which wasn't too bad. It was all flowing over, But 7 days.
Yeah.
At the time at the postmark on it.
Yeah. I didn't save my letters. They told us to destroy them because if you would throw them into the trash and the enemy would get a hold of them, they could write your wife or your loved one or whatever and say that you were missing in action, that you were captured or you were something. So they suggested that we destroy them. So I burned all my letters. And when I came back from overseas, my wife had saved all my letters and she gave them to me. And I said, no, I don't want them. We threw them away. I do have some letters that I wrote to a friend of the family. In fact, it was my wife's cousin, and she saved those letters. And I've got 3 of the letters. She gave them to me about 2 or 3 months ago. She says, I've got those letters that she sent to me. And so I've got those letters. That's the only ones I've got that I sent.
Yeah. Did anybody ever make stupid comments after you got home about the Vietnam War?
Did they ever
make dumb comments to you about the Vietnam War?
About being in the war, no, there was an incident when we came back to the States. We came back through Travis Air Force Base in California, and I kind of buddied up with a guy from Seattle, Washington. We were in the same outfit, and he had a captured weapon also, so we processed out at Oakland Army Terminal, and then we went to San Francisco International Airport to catch a plane back home. And we walked into the airport. Of course, you had to carry your weapon. They were in a case. You had to have them in a case. And you had to carry your weapon. So him and I were in our military uniforms and carrying our weapon through the airport. And we sat down. And this was in December 30th, 1967. At that time, the hippie thing was going on in California. And there was a bunch of hippies that were there at the airport. And they wouldn't sit by us, you know, because they didn't like soldiers and they were against the war, which I was too, but I didn't have much choice about it. So they wouldn't sit around us. And they were kind of taunting us and carrying on there for a while. And this policeman came over and he said, "Are those people bothering you?" He said, "No." I said, "We're going to catch a flight out pretty soon. We're just glad to be back in the States." And he said, "I see you got some rifles there." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I bet you wish you had some ammunition for them rifles." And I looked at him and I said, "How do you know we don't?"
Yeah, that's right.
And he looked at me kind of funny. He said, "I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. I'll be back in about an hour." I said, "Well, we don't have any ammunition," but I thought I'd just tell you that.
What was your feeling about us pulling out there toward the end? You know, in the 1974.
Yeah, I think 75 is when the North Vietnamese invaded Saigon.
Yeah.
I really didn't have any strong feelings, you know, about the war. I don't hate Jane Fonda. I think she shouldn't have went to North Vietnam.
That was a big mistake on her part.
Yeah, that was she misstepped there. But I never did really have any animosity against anyone who didn't serve in the military or against anyone that, you know, if they could get out of the war, that was fine. I just never really harbored any feelings pro or con against it. I think it was a shame that 58,000 people had to die.
That's the bad
you know.
part. Yeah, we lost all those, and it feels like it was for nothing.
Yeah, for what? And I know when we were there here last November, those people still plant rice with the water buffalo, and they still do things just like they did 44 years ago, and I don't know if they would really care whether they were under a communist form of government or a democratic form of government.
Right, they don't care.
No, they couldn't care, and about 70% of the people that live in Vietnam now were not there when the war ended in 75. So for them, the war was just a non-event. You know, they weren't there, they weren't alive.
Yeah, something had happened before their time.
Yeah, it was like the Second World War to me. You know.
You know what? That's the great part of the Koreans, Lynn.
Yeah.
The Korean people, they teach their kids.
Yeah, they tell about the war.
What the United States did.
Saved the South.
Yeah, and they're very appreciative.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, I appreciate you being here today. I want to thank you for that.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah. If you ever meet a veteran on the streets or somebody in uniform, just walk up to them and say, "Thank you for your service." Because remember, freedom is never free. Thank you, and good night.